you just go, there's no restrictions on access. You basically go here to classes@stanford.edu, and there are a bunch of courses. And so in an ideal world, there'll be one stuck in here that's sort of like statistics. Any faculty just has to approve having one of these projects. A grad student or postdoc, anyone could be an instructor. But yeah, so the idea is anyone can go and sign up, but you can then, of course, just segment it. So you can, for example, say that you don't actually, you can ignore the data of everyone who doesn't come from an actual class. So it is anyone can use it, but you can choose what data you're actually going to analyze. And one can, yes, exactly. And they take care of all of that for you. Yeah. Okay, sure. But yeah, and
that's a good question. I never see it saying. Yeah.
Well, if you want to have me back to tell the psych department about MOOCs, I'll be happy to.
I was just thinking about research.
Yes. So the nice thing is basically they do that work for you. They handle sign up. And one way actually that I've started trying to think about using MOOCs that I hadn't thought of before is actually just use as a platform where if you find some classroom that's willing to do a study with you, just point them to the MOOC. And then they sign up for your course through it. So it's almost like they kind of handle a lot of the work for you setting up a platform. It really, for me, it has to be really easy to build prototype tests, and that's actually why I'm embedding software into it as opposed to using what's there. And the idea here is that I'm really open to it. Researchers should be able to actually directly implement what study they want and get data immediately. It shouldn't go off into some database that you then have to fish after later. One thing also I've realized is that online resources that are modular and also online make it much easier to collaborate. You know, I can look at the stimuli for your experiment in just a second. You send me a hyperlink. And that's actually what I've done in several studies already. If you're interested in this, one thing I started this quarter was just a reading discussion group every Tuesday for an hour, just to kind of sit down for that period of time and read a paper or see a presentation that's kind of relevant to this. Like it might be on the technical details. It might be on what kind of research is really well suited to it. It might be on how you sort of finds educational content you can adapt, that kind of thing. So feel free to join. And they have just sort of kept notes from the meetings and kind of outlined the logic of this approach. Okay, so just to jump back into research, that was kind of a bit of a divergence, but the reason I mentioned this is to say that now I kind of see a lot of research I'm doing as being focused around these modules or these MOOClets, and basically how can you use this as a paradigm for research. So one line of research that I did mainly before I came here was actually trying to understand why asking questions or explaining why it helps people learn. And so this is the polished research I'm not going to talk about at all. But basically I look at things like a set of experiments on how does explaining why help people discover patterns, how does that draw on prior knowledge, and how can that actually be harmful in some cases. And so what actually happened as I was moving through this is that I tried to move from artificial categories on to things like people learning about social categories, and eventually I realized that without really changing the fundamental research questions, I could just adjust the stimuli to be formally equivalent to what I was looking at before. So if you think of category learning, A, you see an object, is it A or B? You see an object, is it A or B? And the paradigm I used was basically having people learn these categories by seeing examples over and over, and they've been prompted to explain, well, why might this be A or why might it be a B? That's actually a pretty general kind of paradigm. And one thing I've realized that I think is really great that psychologists contribute is that people don't often look at their particular content domain as just being an instance of learning a category, learning a causal relationship, learning an analogy. And so I've actually transitioned now to trying to think about, well, what if you have people learning math problems from solving examples? So you see a math problem and you see the answer is right or wrong. You have to explain why it might be right or explain why it might be wrong. And that's sort of where I've sort of ended up in terms of those lab experiments. But what I'm actually going to present is the most recent work, which is focused a lot more on self-questioning learning strategies. So one thing that I thought of doing was moving in this nice transition where materials are getting successively more complex, and I'm just trying to find real-world context where I can apply what I've already done. But actually, another approach is to say, well, you're moving here from the research end to a real-world setting, but what if you actually just dive straight into a real-world setting and understand, well, what's a real-world setting well suited to research? What are the kind of practical problems they face? And what can researchers do to improve those? And then trying to make a contribution there and then forging back to create a link in that way. And so that's at least this approach that I took here. So all the research in this vein has actually been on Khan Academy. So how many people know what Khan Academy is? Or, okay. How many have been to the website in the last 2 months? Okay. So basically, Khan Academy is a website that provides lots of educational content, especially K-12, early university, and they have a huge math database. You might have heard about them for videos, but actually from an experimental psychology point of view, what's really useful is their math exercises. So this is a context where you land on khanacademy.org/exercise dashboard. And they're just thousands of exercises for students to do. And so here's one that you might see. You see an exercise pop up, and they all fit into this template. So it just generalizes right across in terms of the dynamics. The grades on a history midterm are normally distributed with that mean and that standard deviation. Chris got a 69. Can you find a z-score? So at this point, students can enter an answer. They plug something in, and if they're brilliant, they get it right. They're done. And they go into the next problem. And the idea is that you keep doing problems over and over. Their problems are different kinds. So there's some measures of transfer and things like that. But if you don't get it right, what happens? You might get an attempt, you're told it's wrong. You actually can't go forward until you get it right. So you either have to keep attempting, or you can actually ask for hints, which is basically equivalent to just seeing a solution. So when you click that show solution or like a hint button, it does the same thing. It shows you the next line. A z-score is defined as next line. You can calculate the z-score, and so basically it reveals a hint to you, which is basically just a line of a word solution every time you click, until eventually you just get the answer. And then you can just type that in and go on. And so you can visualize students on Khan Academy for a wide range of content, from trigonometry to geometry to statistics, solving many of these problems and slowly transitioning. What that means is it's actually a really rich set of measures of learning you can get here. So I actually haven't talked about experiments at all. I'm just thinking about actually the learning measure part. How many problems did students practice? How accurate are they on the ones they do? You also get things like time they spend on it and how many hints they need in order to solve a problem. So this is nice, and it's a bit counterintuitive because we're starting out with the content, but actually with where we can get really good learning measures. Now, how do you embed experiments in this context? So what's again good about Khan Academy, at least a year and a half ago when I started looking at this, as opposed to Coursera and Udacity and edX, not that those aren't great, is that they've got randomization, or what's called A/B testing in the industry, built in. Every one of these is a single HTML file, and you can just modify it and then randomly assign people to either one. And so looking through technical constraints and kind of that back and forth between what are the research questions I'd want to ask and what are the technical constraints of the platform and what are the practical things that they'd like to improve, the paradigm I settled on here in this kind of MOOClet is actually stick text in there and randomize people to different versions of that text. So control condition could be no text at all. Then you can add many different conditions that all have different versions of text. That's a pretty simple change, and you might think that there's nothing we could really do interesting. But I'm sure you're all DBS experimental psychologists who know you can squeeze an interesting question into anything. And one thing that actually I think that makes psychology really well suited to this kind of research is that we really tend to study things that make very minimal changes but have outsized effects on behavior. And so I'm going to just skip ahead this, but these are some of the criteria that are really guiding me in trying to identify good context. So what I settled on here was actually, how could I teach people learning or self-questioning strategies through this kind of paradigm? And so the idea here is that I could do something like what I did before, like adding question prompts, asking people to explain why they chose an answer. But if you teach people the habit of asking themselves questions, that's something you would expect to have an effect, not just on one trial, but actually over a wide range. Now, one thing that's interesting, this is super hard to do. So when you look at the research on trying to teach people this, actually, if you just start with the transfer literature, showing how hard transfer is, that's kind of would seem like a bit of a hopeless task. You're not just transferring a concept to another setting. You're trying to transfer a behavior, a set of strategies to a wide range of contexts, where it's not really clear what the conditions of application are. There are a few things that I think make this more hopeful here. One is that in an online context, we can actually keep reminding and prompting people, because it's sort of a digital resource that doesn't get as tired as a tutor or your nagging friend. Another is that the opportunities we have for data collection are really different. You can basically collect longitudinal data over, let's say, 2 months of students solving these problems. So you can get a much finer signal on whether something's actually working or not. So it's actually pretty well suited for studying something that you might get a pretty small effect, minute, but at least if you detect it, you can then take that effect and build it up by doing successive experiments that are improving what you've already done before and testing out new ways of impacting behavior. And another thing is also that there's a ton of literature that's mostly languages. So based on the research that I've done on asking people explanations, and also just using that as an entry point to literature on more generally from education, from educational psychology, on how you can teach people strategies of asking themselves questions, I came with a set of prompts that were at least hopeful that they would work. So I kind of did a bit of a literature review where my criteria was, it was an experiment, so we had strong evidence it would help, and it actually impacted a measure of behavior that was robust in the sense that it wasn't just within one session, it was over a longer period of time, it was an authentic behavior, and it was also one that was tough to get in the sense it required transfer. And so I kept that in mind in choosing prompts. The other thing I did was start to look a bit at research in habit and behavior change. So I hadn't really thought about it until I went to this context, but in a way, a strategy, what kind of concept are we learning when we learn a strategy? Like asking myself, what's my goal right now, or what's the next step? It's not just a concept like learning math or like learning a category, where it's pretty clear what the concept is and where it might be applied. It's something that's a bit, it seems to combine elements of facts, relational knowledge, but also there's part of it that's actually a bit like a behavior. So whatever cognitive construct best captures what it means to have a set of behaviors or habits, that might actually, looking at that literature might actually inform how we'd want to improve people's use of strategies. And that's actually what I found. So I reviewed a lot of work that's been done in habit and behavior change that kind of reinforce some of the design decisions here. Okay. So basically, here's the experiment. Again, that's the kind of paradigm you might recognize, but all I did was add in a clickable link. So in a way, this was cheating. It's not just text. It's text that unfolds into more text. But you add that link suggesting to students, click here to learn about the what, why, how strategy. And when they clicked on it, it would pop down and give them more information. So to use this strategy, ask yourself these what, why, how questions after each hint on a problem. What does this step mean to you? Why is it helpful to take this step? Or how do you know the step is right? Again, this is a really nice aspect of the paradigm, is you can always pack more information here. So you can actually deliver a pretty rich set of, when I say intervention, I mean a set of ways that you could manipulate or change people's behavior. So things we can use as independent variables through something that's pretty simple technically. And I wonder, it might be helpful to just remind you. So if you think back to this paradigm, this context, basically people are solving these problems. And so when that text pops up, it's saying, as you're thinking through this problem, or as you're looking at steps as solution, these are questions you could be asking yourself. Now, another thing that was embedded in this is actually having cues to remind people to reflect. So in addition to having this link above the exercise, as they would request hints, we just have it pop up and say, well, why is it helpful to take this step? So some of the prompts that they actually had seen previously, but sometimes we randomly cycled in. So there are a lot of constraints in terms of what we can and cannot randomize, and also what data can and cannot be collected on this platform. But what the experimental design was basically, we had several versions of the strategy. This could either show with a text box for people to type into or no text box at all. And what's really interesting is actually that didn't make a big difference. So you would have thought that there's no way you get any effect without people actually typing responses, but just having the strategy pop up was enough to get people to start to change their behavior. Okay.
Did they actually have to type something into
They
that?
didn't have to.
Did they usually?
They did some small proportion of the time. But that's actually, that's data that I'm trying to get now So one thing I'll be dead honest of working with a platform provider is you can't, simple things that you get in your experiment you can't always get. So that's actually, I haven't got a hold of in terms of seeing what people said. Yeah. So, yeah.
I assume you're doing like embedding this like prompts in lots of different questions.
This is just actually right now, if you go on Khan Academy, it has been rolled out across the whole site. But this was just what I'm giving you data for is just a pilot study where it was a single example.
Okay. So if you request different questions, is there a lot of questions?
That's something that I'm going to have to find out from the new data set. But it's a great question.
Is there like there's something like that? There's got to be a big like time for that. So,
You mean you put more time into using this,
yeah.
But then in the long run it's going to benefit you?
Well, maybe if you're not already good at it.
Yeah, so that's like a fantastic question. That's something we're hoping to look at. One thing we could also do is with that kind of data set, we can do a bit of clustering on users just to see, like you said, can we identify profiles of people who were already good at things like this? Like maybe if we look at people who tend to stop and reflect more, these are people already doing things like ask themselves questions, versus people who are speeding through problems. Or maybe there are other signatures we could use, but there's some nice modeling we could do to classify users and then see how these kind of manipulations interact with those features.
I mean, seems to me like people speaking to them getting it right.
Yeah, so sure, so maybe that's a better account of what would work.
Yeah. I mean, you could just do like some questions and start with that information. You're already getting it all right. It's like,
Yeah, I mean, we could do that. So we would have that data, not necessarily on the exact same problems, but on previous problems. Yeah. And so the full, there are 4 conditions we looked at. And again, this is the sort of dive in and try and design a condition that's meant to have a maximal effect on people. It's actually, again, leaping over from the approach of sequentially making something more complex. And so in a way, the better characterization of these things is more like so this was prompting people for understanding. So what does that mean to you? Why is it helpful? How do you know it's right? You know, one characterization of the experimental condition is not what we're typically accustomed to of I'm ruling out this particular hypothesis, but it's more something like designing a treatment that is focused on understanding, but actually is meant to be maximally effective. One way that you could think about why this is justified is that this is actually just establishing a phenomena. If I just did something like take one of the conditions from my previous experiment and ask people, why was that the right answer? I don't know that there's even a phenomenon to study there because I don't know if that actually adds anything beyond doing nothing at all. So I would say this is the first step of seeing whether we have any effect at all, at which point when there's a phenomenon we can then start decomposing and seeing what's driving it. The control condition of practice as usual was actually nothing at all, what they normally do. This was a sort of midway control where actually prompted people to just state their interpretation. So here they were again told the whole thing about here's a good strategy, but the strategy just to say whenever you read a step, try and think about what it's saying and restate it in your own words. And then the other intervention, and this is very much based on some of the research I was reviewing on habit and behavior change, is focused on problem solving. So it's actually thinking, well, what are you doing or thinking right now? Why is what you're currently doing helpful? And how is your current approach working? So these are pretty packaged interventions. So in terms of preliminary results, this is just one study, one exercise we rolled this out on. And there were a bunch of things I learned from this that really improved the second round in terms of making this a lot less complex. Basically, if you look at what I call the intervention problems, these are problems on which people would see the links, you actually don't see any effects at all. So this might in part be because most people only did between like 1 and 15 intervention problems because it was just one single exercise and they would just have seen a couple versions of that. What's interesting though is even from this super minimal change, there is actually an effect. So if you look at post-intervention problems, this is when these links stopped appearing. There we're actually seeing a significant advantage for prompting people to do problem solving. That's not reliable, so we need more data to see if it's significant or not. Sorry, it's not significant, so we'll need more data to see if that advantage is reliable or not. There was also actually an effect of prompt interpretation. So in terms of data, this is pretty messy, and I'm really looking forward to getting data from everything being rolled out. But at least we have some evidence here that there's some phenomenon in the sense of just the simple change of adding those prompts which are being based on a wide research, can actually make people start to be more accurate in problems they're solving. Yes?
Yeah. But I actually do like
Yes, exactly. So that's a great lead up. This is, I mean, you might look at this and say, well, 0.5%, is that at all interesting? Maybe everyone on the site is more diligent than me, but I would suspect that most people don't even look at those links, and very few of them click it. We couldn't actually log who clicked that link, but we can log it in the new one that rolled out. So in terms of the distinction you're making, maybe, I'm not sure everyone else is familiar with it, but I wasn't, at least as a psychologist, is intention to treat. So this, basically comparing this condition against that condition, is intention to treat. It's saying everyone here could have been exposed to prompted understanding, and everyone here was not. That's super conservative, because a large majority of those people, 40% of them, don't do more than one problem. So these people who show up on the site, click, and then they're gone. They're people who never look at the link. They're people who never click on it. So it might actually be that the actual treatment effect is a lot larger for people who actually engage in the behavior. And if you think about it, in a lab experiment, this is much less of an issue, because basically we force people to engage in the behavior. So it might be that this effect is a lot larger when we actually look at it.
Then the converse is instead like because you've got to, like, to get the post-intervention problem, you've got to, like, have people stay.
So
deal with, like,
so when I say intervention, all I mean is that when you click on a problem that was selected for randomization, you enter the intervention. So this was like solving equations. And if you click on that, you immediately enter the intervention, you get randomized to condition. So this doesn't, people may have dropped out more, but that won't affect these results.
You're asking whether there's differential around that post-intervention, because you've got standard,
Yeah, so basically, so that's a good question. That's just in terms of, so I guess maybe there are two questions. One is, could these effects be due to differential, just like survivor bias, where people are dropping out more in one condition than another? And I would say the answer to that is no, because this is the mean, when I say this, the answer to that no is no, because once someone clicks on a problem, they enter into one of these 4 cells, and this is basically what's the mean accuracy for people who are entered into this on subsequent problems.
Wait, they have to look at least 2 problems to get to the bottom.
Yes, that's right.
But we don't know how many people just looked at the first problem and didn't go on to the
Something.
second problem.
So basically, if there's
They had an invention, but didn't look at the problem.
yeah. So basically, the idea. Let me just think if that's covered. Okay, so I think that's covered, and I can pull up the data to show you. But basically, that would rely on a very special case where someone is entered into the condition, and basically you get a huge number of people who see that, like all the people who would get low scores anyway, see that, click here to learn about the what, why, how strategy, and leave, and they never come back. So they get, well, they would still get 0 accuracy on the problem that they clicked on.
Well, I was thinking they might complete that problem, but not complete the second, not
Sure.
go on to a second problem.
That's true. So let me think about that. So it would depend on a. It would depend. I mean, I think it's possible. I think the data we have would rule it out, because it would depend on people who drop out doing well in the problems they do so far, and then dropping out.
That's
Yeah.
like sensible, because like if I'm doing really well at like these little practice
Mhm.
problems and I'm using them to prepare for like a quiz which has these types of problems,
Yes.
and then you interrupt me with this like prompt, and I'm like irritated and leave.
Sure.
But if this prompt is helpful to me, maybe I recognize that and stick around.
Shouldn't you just be able to count? I mean, there should just be some more count data on them.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that I'm trying to remember. I think that helps rule out the kind of interpretations that you're raising, but I can definitely double check that and make sure.
I'm actually completely confused about what actually going on here.
Okay, sure.
So, how did people got a piece of email telling them that?
No, it's basically when
How
you
did they even get into the study in the first place?
so when you're on the site, you move from exercise to exercise. So they're like
These are people who are just visiting Khan Academy because they feel like
this is a super heterogeneous population. Okay. So 40% of these people just opened up the site and clicked on it for no reason. They just said someone told me what Khan Academy is, they clicked it, they did one problem, and they were gone. Or they found in a Google search. The other 60% of people is composed of things like a teacher saying, I'd like you all to go and do this problem. They go and do it. Of people who are just using Khan Academy because they use it to practice homework, and they might have been doing another problem in algebra, and they just happened to be led to this one. So there are 300 different exercises you could be doing, and this is one of them. So the way
you know that those are 40% in one of those subgroups and 60 in another for help.
I'm estimating it based on how many people do one problem and never return.
Okay.
Yes. But it is, I mean, that's one estimate. And I would say...
Okay, but so you have no control of that. It's just whether
no control.
Stumbled into one.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. So then people stumble into one of these problems.
Yes.
And if they stumbled into one of them, and they then go on and do at least one more.
If they actually just clicked on a problem, they entered into the intervention. So as soon as they touch the problem, that's how the random assignment works. Okay. Like as soon as it loads in their browser, you're in the experiment.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So if they dropped out before they did any post-intervention problems, how would they show that?
That's true. Okay. So yeah. So actually, that's true. So I should double check that to see if that's actually causing an issue. Because they would just have they would be missing data for that. So that didn't happen differentially across conditions, but there could be something special going on where, yeah, so no, but yeah, I'll check that.
But that would be worth reporting.
I'll check it, yeah. Yeah, no, thanks for the suggestion. I won't put you under any illusions. This is not extremely messy data. Like everything how people show up, you have very little control over. You have more control over how things are delivered. Yes? Yes. Yes, those are pretty messy.
So you didn't filter out.
What I'm showing you here again is the most conservative data you can do, because once you start filtering people, it can make the effect stronger. It does, but then you start to get issues like differential dropout. Yeah. So, but no, I think it's a totally reasonable analysis. The one reason I shied away from doing that is that you do get a larger effect, but then you are getting issues where I'm starting to exclude people who are just low performers in the first place. Yeah, but I definitely appreciate these comments. They are definitely worth bearing in mind. And when we have the full data set, I'll be able to look at a lot of these things in full detail. Okay, so that was just a taste of what kind of work is going on there. The other line of work, which actually I should probably jump over super fast, is actually looking more at how beliefs about intelligence influence motivation. I think this data was collected first about 6 to 8 months ago, so that's a lot more reliable. But I think you're all familiar with these kinds of issues about whether intelligence is malleable or fixed. And the question here is now, how do you teach a growth mindset? So there's been a lot of work by Carol Dweck, by Greg Walter, and Jeff Cohen, Angela Duckworth, Hertz, Dave Arnescu, Chris Romero, on actually interventions. And so this is kind of in line with that kind of work, which to me has been hugely informative for how I think about research. I think the one thing that's a bit different is that this is not just an intervention in the sense of providing something just in an outcome. This is actually a bit more like trying to embed a lab question in an educational resource. And so one thing that we did test here, and this is collaborative work with people from Carol Dweck's group like Dave and Ben Haley, is whether it's really just positive encouragement that could be driving a lot of this effect. So again, you know the context. Basically, we have a practice usual condition. Then there's a growth mindset message condition, where we add a message like, remember, the more you practice, the smarter you become. So here's the first experiment comparison. So that's Jasha. He's a half-time postdoc here in computational neuroscience and half-time at Khan Academy. Two examples of a growth mindset message. We actually had about 14 of these in all. Mistakes help you learn. Think hard to learn from them. And so this is a super minimal effect, and all the points people raised before are going to apply here. Intention to treat versus people actually look at the message. A lot of people who aren't actually really doing this just because they're involved in classes, they're just sort of passing through. But at least let's look at the conservative analysis, comparing cross conditions. So you could ask, well, would adding this message change how many problems people attempted? And so the idea, this is of the problems for which messages were added. This was 12 different kinds of problems. On average, it was between like 10 and 100 instances of those that people did. Did adding these messages change how many problems people attempted? Just did they do more problems? And actually what you see is you see about a 1% increase. So there is actually, just from adding that small message above, an effect. Now, you could imagine people might be attempting more problems, but that doesn't mean that they're actually learning any better. They could be attempting more problems and actually making more mistakes. The accuracy could be going down. They could be sort of flailing. So here's another measure. How many, did they increase how many problems that they got right on their first attempt? So this is saying over the course of all the times the messages were being shown, or in the control condition where messages weren't shown, but basically they'd been assigned, to they're sort of directly matched. Did adding messages increase how many problems people got right on the first attempt? So the idea is this is that people are actually getting better at solving them. And actually you see the exact same kind of increase. So adding these messages not just making people attempt more problems, it's actually making them progress more quickly because they're doing better. Now, oh yeah, sure.
The 0.9% increase
yes.
is the ratio of 36.2 over 35. Right?
No, it's 35.9 minus 36.2, so 0.7 divided by, yeah. So now here's another thing that we looked at. There was actually just not something I would have strongly predicted, but here's actually proportion correct. If you look at the number they got correct on the first attempt, divided by how many they actually attempted. So this is actually the accuracy rate. You do actually see an increase here, which is really remarkable because you can imagine it would make people work harder or solve more problems. But actually, whatever effect this is having is actually making people more accurate on those problems that they're attempting. So in terms of trying to look at this, people raise some great points about what kinds of data we could look at. And what I'm actually doing now is, with the full data set, doing a lot more sort of modeling / sophisticated kind of regressions, trying to see, can we identify mediators? Like, is it the case that people who are getting things more accurate, is it because they're just spending more time on problems? Is it because they're actually asking for more hints? Are there any kind of other markers of behavior we can identify? Another thing that I'm doing is running an experiment that's not a lab experiment, but it's a bit more in a controlled context with Neil Heffernan, who runs a platform called Assessments, where basically it's math problems that students are assigned by their teachers. So it's smaller samples, but it's actually a pretty controlled environment compared to Khan Academy. And it also lets us ask some new questions. Okay, so in terms of thinking about those results, what might people think? Or what do you all think? Maybe if you're a bit skeptical, you think, well, that's obvious, right? You showed a message, people worked hard, they did better. I think that you're probably less susceptible to that because you're a psychologist and you know how hard it is to get an effect. It seems obvious. Another thing you could say is, well, anything is statistically significant with that large of an N. You're just throwing things out, you're bound to find something. So I'm trying to address those by actually thinking about a second comparison that actually had a pretty important theoretical point. So this is a third condition. We actually had 6 in all, but these are the key ones. Not just practice as usual and growth mindset, but actually a positive message condition. So these are a set of messages that are encouraging and positive affect. Like, some of these problems are hard, do your best. But it's pretty subtle. They're not emphasizing to someone that they get harder, they get smarter by working hard. It's not emphasizing intelligence is malleable. So while there are reasons that you might think that the effects of growth mindset that Carol Dweck has extensively mapped out with collaborators, you wouldn't think those are just due to being positive. There hasn't been a direct empirical test that if you show people messages based on growth mindset and contrast those with generally affective messages, that it's actually malleable intelligence ruling it out.
Yes, it's not a positive. That's telling me that the problem is like too difficult for me and I'm likely to get it wrong.
Okay, so maybe you would prefer.
That's me. I'm not very good at math, so. Yeah.
So I'd be happy to grant that that might not be the best label to characterize it. When I say it's positive, what I mean to say is that it's a message that is providing encouragement, or that seems to communicate some kind of positive affect to a learner. So a learner who's just seeing nothing at all is getting no affect and no encouragement, whereas someone who's getting growth mindset message, that could help.
You should have a manipulation check.
to see if people actually do it. Yes. Yeah, so actually,
I do think that for some people that it's possible, but for others
it might be discouraging. Yeah, no, that's true. And so, yeah, that also is why I think these are sort of useful, but being able to do lab experiments to do exactly that, check these kind of manipulations, see how they're rated, would be really important. So I think that would be a great thing to check. Okay, so this is really testing directly, does any positive message work? And in fact, the theoretical point here is, what is it that's making people change their behavior when you're cultivating a growth mindset? So we have three conditions now. So positive messages don't do any better than practice as usual. Seeing that positive message isn't any better than seeing nothing at all. And if you compare growth mindset, it's still helping more than that positive message. So we're seeing that in how many problems people attempt, in how many problems they're actually getting correct on the first try, and actually also in accuracy rates. So for me, this is a pretty tiny effect, has many of the issues that people raised before. But it is pretty interesting in that we're simultaneously answering this theoretical question of what is it about a motivational message that emphasizes intelligence being malleable? Is it really that you have to emphasize people can get smart through hard work, or is it actually just positive affect? And we seem to have evidence against that. Although I think there are a lot of important falls we need to do to rule out the alternatives. But it's also actually practical. So this is not just a finding that suggests that we should add these kind of messages. This is also actually something you can just instantiate in any math exercise on Khan Academy. It can roll out across a wide range of those, and also it can be applicable to a wide range of other settings because it's kind of paradigm. Maybe it even helps with messages in textbooks, or it helps in online courses, or even courses people might be teaching now. Now, what's interesting is how different are these messages? So it seems subtle, but if you actually give these messages to adults, do they think that it's obvious growth mindset message should be more effective? So basically what we did here was get a sample of Mechanical Turk, which I'd love to follow up with teachers. I just need to figure out how to recruit that population, clear IRB. They were given the two batches of messages, and they were asked to rate for a setting, and we spelled out like students solving math problems online. Which of these messages do you think would be better to show students? And they saw the 14 mindset, 14 positive. They could either say the mindset would be better than positive, positive better mindset equally effective, or neither effective. There's actually no significant difference. So most people think they're equally effective. Small percentage say mindset better, small percentage say positive better than mindset. So this is actually really interesting that it really underscores the idea that this kind of effect is not something that's really transparently obvious to people. What would be nice would actually be to get students' ratings. Okay. In terms of where this, I think, how sort of transport these results are, and also what are the nice paradigms to keep exploring this kind of research, you could pretty easily imagine this going into something like a MOOC. So this is a screenshot of what like Coursera's stats course looks like. You can add messages. And I mean, the messages that we put in here are really, they're almost like an existent proof. I'm sure that in collaboration with a wide range of people and drawing on different approaches and practical expertise as well as theoretical approaches, we can make much better messages. And we can also start trying to design these so that they're tailored to particular kinds of individual profiles. An ongoing experiment that I'm getting data out for now is motivational videos in MOOCs. So basically, this is what Stanford's Open edX looks like. You've got your content here, and then you've got materials that people see. So basically, we had this instructor have an extra course introduction video. The practice as usual condition was nothing. They just saw a message saying, have fun in the course. The growth mindset message was a 2-minute video that I wrote the script for in collaboration with the instructor and other people, having the instructor emphasize to students that this would be challenging, but adopting a growth mindset would actually help them. We also had a text version of the mindset message because, for a couple of reasons, but one thing to check is that it's important to kind of know if there is any kind of effect. Is it due to actually being in the video format, or is it actually just the content of the message? But another is that in terms of thinking about paradigms during research, it's much harder to work with videos made by an individual person than to work with messages that are spelled out in text. So if we want to keep on using this as a paradigm for research, it'd be much better if we can get similar effects of this size. And then we can change many things about this. Now, another, of course, is actually the exact same mindset message, that was read by another person who all we told students were, this is a hint from another instructor. So it's the same video, but it's actually from another instructor. And this is actually a really nice contrast, because if we did get an effect here, what's the theoretical conclusion we can draw from this? Is it that adding a growth mindset video can help make students solve more problems or complete the course? Actually, it could be that it's adding a video from your instructor. So the fact that this was an anonymous instructor means that we can actually think of this not just as a result, but actually a product. You can almost take this resource and drop it into any course, and at least a priori you have some reason to expect that this thing can be added in a modular way to help boost student progress. We had another control that had positive encouragement, and one that emphasized more on belonging. And that data I'm collecting now, when I've looked at like overall grades, I don't see a big effect, but we're trying to drill in now and look at specific outcomes. Okay, so the work I sort of discussed here is really thinking about how might an understanding of how people process information shed light on improving learning, and also how can we use those learning contexts to actually study this process better. And how am I thinking about the beliefs that people have about intelligence influence their motivation? And so, mainly I talked about teaching people self-questioning learning strategies, as well as actually trying to change beliefs about motivation. Both of those in the context of this paradigm of a MOOClet, a math exercise on Khan Academy, but one that's maybe applicable to many situations. And also, I think, at least tries to sketch out a paradigm that we can use for this kind of research. And so I guess now I'm really, whenever I'm coming across psychology paper or a set of results, I'm thinking, well, what's an online education context, or even just a digital resource that sort of maps that paradigm, or where can you adapt that paradigm slightly to actually be able to ask that question with these real-world stimuli? And so hopefully this is actually kind of getting towards some of these goals of using digital resources to combine a lab context with a classroom. And of course, I think this is really an early stage. All of this stuff I've had to figure out the platform and build it up. And it would be great to have other people involved in this effort. And all this painful learning I had to do, I'd love to save people the trouble of having to do as well. And so I think I'll wrap up there, but I did have a bunch more slides that we could chat about in terms of future directions and projects I'm doing now that I'd be curious people's thoughts on. And also actually how to go about this kind of research, like what are resources that are going to be useful? How do you actually try and think about mapping a project you might be doing, or the next step you take into doing research in this context? Okay, so thank you. Yeah?
Subjects only saw it on one problem, or they saw the same message repeated for every problem?
There were 14 messages, and they were randomly sampled on every problem. So 14 within condition, yes. So you assign to a condition like growth mindset or positive message, and some others. There's a batch, and on every problem you'd randomly sample which was shown. In retrospect, this was actually a mistake that I didn't make in the second experiment. You have to have some problems where you don't show any message at all, because those are really nice control. Because then you can look at accuracy on problems where no message shows up, but it's within the intervention phase, versus problem exercise in which a problem shows up, also within the intervention phase.
Did you, I don't know if you had the same way to look at this, but you're looking after the first failure, right? So like how you react to failure.
Yeah. I think that would definitely be possible to look at. So I think that would be something I'd have to go in and sort out. A lot of this is that we have another data set coming, so I haven't gone and done those analyses, but it's also just limited time in doing that. I think that would be a nice thing to pull out of it. It just requires a lot of processing. It's like 90 gigs of data that's not very structured. But yeah, I think that would actually be nice to look at. I think that one thing that might get a bit more directly at that question is the experiment on assist once, where actually we have a condition where people only see a message after they get something wrong. So as opposed to just blanketing people with messages, and then I think your analysis is a nice one. Are blanketed messages, are they helping more after a failure for whether they do another problem or not? This one is actually directly manipulating you only see a message when you get something wrong, and it's a growth mindset message. So that we might be able to directly pin down whether that's better than just being planted with it. But it's a good point.
Very basic idea.
Uh-huh.
You're struggling with like the size of the data set. I mean, I'm sure there's computer scientists that can do this much better than me. But like, if you just subsample your data, that will make everything easy to run. And you've got so much data that subsampling it won't substantially reduce your power.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Unfortunately, yeah, I think that's definitely true. So far, I've just been running on the full data set because the effects are pretty small, and because so much of the data is just people who aren't really doing the experiment. It's more that they just kind of show up. So it, yeah, I've been pretty conservative about that because then you get differences in dropout across conditions. But I think that, I mean, both those things are reasonable.
I guess it's like, it relates to a broader question of like, what's your goal in doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, to me, it seems like you're going to have a lot of people go on this website and they're going to like do one or two problems and they're going to be like, I know what that is.
Yes.
One day I might come back and do this. The improvements that you would want to see really are in the students who are engaged. Like, you know, if someone's not going to sit there for at least 15 minutes,
then maybe
like,
it doesn't matter.
If I'm like, and I guess I think like you're in this interesting like hybrid research industry position where you ask research questions, but it's also good if it's like practically relevant. Surely if I'm like running these courses, if someone's only there for 10 minutes, I'm thinking like,
then it doesn't matter.
They're just checking it out. Like, any measurement from them, in fact, is just like adding noise and messing up my measurement of what I'm doing to the people that actually matter to me.
Yeah, I actually think that's a great articulation of an argument for doing that. No, you have a great point there. And that's a nice way of making the case for it. I think the one thing I'm trying to think about is how to remove those people who are not taking it seriously without unfairly just removing people who are low performers. But I could probably try and use some of, based on what you said, use short-term information about where they show up and go, and like relate that to like request previous data of like whether they engage with the site and how often they engage with it. Yeah. I mean, I should mention, you know, this is one amongst like several things I'm doing. I think these analyses are great questions. If people are interested in working on this, I'm always happy to collaborate and talk about it.
I'm confused about whether you have any information at all about the here.
Almost none. So no demographics.
Do you know that sequence of events occurred within a single sort of like session or something like that?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So actually, I'm saying that wrongly. Almost no identifying information like age, gender, demographics, grade, don't have. But we do have a huge time history of from the time you signed up, like 6 months, from 6 months ago, what problems have you done on what dates?
Okay.
Yeah, so we do have that.
I see. So somebody could have signed up for Khan Academy. They go there once every couple of months.
Yes.
Randomly, other people might be going there every
Yes.
evening. All that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know about it.
It's implicit in the data set. Yes.
Yeah. So every time they log back in, you just add another block to it.
Yes. Yeah.
Do some people do your experiment more than once? Is there a way of preventing that?
Every time they come back, it recognizes they're in the intervention, this one. So it would make them, if they do these problems, make them see the correct message.
Okay, so these events can occur across different login.
Yes.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so actually, yeah, I should make sure to specify that. This is a very gross overall picture, but yes. This is basically over 2 months. When you average across all these people, what do you get in? Yeah.
But this includes non-registered users, right?
That's a good question. Let me think.
If it's just registered users, right, but it's non-registered, you can switch browsers or go to or whatever.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, that's right. Yep, you're right. That's true. I should actually check how those people are being handled. That's true. And actually, that could be an issue. If that varies by exploitation, that could be an issue. I should ask them. One thing Khan Academy does is they at least try to track people, even if they're not registered. And once they do register, that all gets linked in.
They may fail because they shifted from one computer.
Exactly, and it can't catch that at all. Yeah.
Okay. Well, are there any more questions?
Well, maybe do I have 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Just some things that might be. I guess maybe I'm a bit interested actually in what people are doing. Like, actually, I'm not sure I know all of it. Do you mind just quickly? Maybe I say what's an experiment you've done that recently and who you are. So Cameron.
I work in Jay's lab.
Okay.
Until fairly recently, I was working on mathematical cognition.
Your 2 minutes is going to get used up. You asked for 2 minutes.
That's true. Okay. All right. Okay. I'm going to point people who I don't know.
With this and we'll be clear about what we're in for.
That's true. You're right. Okay. What's your name and what do you work on?
Well, hold on. You said yes and then you proceeded. So
well, I was going to spend like 48 seconds. Okay. All right. Okay. That's true. Let me just throw out. Okay, 2 minutes. Basically, if you're interested in this kind of work, I'm happy to chat more. There are a lot of people in psych who do that too. One thing I think is worth thinking about is in terms of online learning environments, really there's a lot of great machine learning work on graphical models, and there's been work in Carnegie Mellon's pattern philosophy on how if you're manipulating, when you have the ability that you have in online environments to manipulate many variables at once. So for example, you might manipulate what prompts someone's shown, what prompt they see, and also what kind of hint policy they get. You can actually do some really sophisticated things in terms of experimental design. So I think actually this is opening up sort of new avenues where things that look crazy to you work really well, like intervening on multiple things at once, doing sequential interventions where you might run one experiment and then stop and start running another. And that can actually help us more quickly figure out what's going on in terms of causal structure. I think I found this really interesting in terms of thinking about taking other disciplinary approaches like HCI, design-based thinking, where actually you get there's a lot of stuff you might not want to do, like mess with data and have to do some programming. But if you start with a product and you think about how do I ask my question in the context, that I actually find that really opens up a lot of interesting directions, and overall you can do more research in the long run. It also kind of, high investment but high return. And one thing I found also that as an experimental psychologist that we can really add is actually just the ability to synthesize literature. Like it won't seem to you that that's anything valuable because it's not really that incentivized, but being able to synthesize a set of literature and say, well, here's some findings and here's how you apply them practically, that's the kind of thing that I think when we're looking for people to partner with, if you can offer them that, I can improve your learning by applying this research, you can then actually get a lot more of your work done that might be getting the questions you care about. Or I've actually found it's starting to change what I've worked on. Like the growth mindset work is really because I was just incredibly impressed by anything that has that big of an effect in such a small period of time has got to be theoretically important. It's sort of hitting on like one of those causal variables that has a huge effect in the world, like something that's really a deep part of psychology. And so these are things I've just put together, like synthesizing research that's really relevant to education. I'm happy for suggestions on it. And this is actually with a clinical psych faculty on improving clinical psych, like cognitive behavioral therapy, by applying research on memory and learning. Here's actually more in the context of just these MOOClets or modules. And in terms of doing this so it doesn't take years, there's lots of rapid authoring software. You can make an education resource that allows randomization, no problem. Here's some resource on actually just running these kind of experiments. We have a symposium at APS with other people at Stanford as well, like social psych. And also, just if you're trying to feel your way around this gigantic space of people who could be relevant, there are lots. If you think you want something, I'm betting it's there. It's just a matter of knowing where it is and who to ask for it. Like some crazy paradigm you'd like to run, or something that's exactly the niche that you'd like to, a question you'd ask. There's probably some company or some product or some way to get that done. So just throwing those things out to you.
Thanks very much.
And if you're interested in me knowing what you do, Please come and tell me. I'm curious to hear.
Sorry, it's just.
No, you're right. 2 minutes is like one of those times where you're like, oh yeah, it'll be 2 minutes, and then it drags on.